I will practice speaking English once I learn some grammar and some vocabulary first. Or I will speak English if I learn or know more words and my grammar is more advanced. These are one of the most common words I hear from you so many times and from so many of you. And they are simply not true. It's just a common misconception and leads you to all sorts of problems. First one being a complete language block. Imagine if this idea was actually true. Would any of us learn our own native language? Has anyone ever learned their own language through learning grammar or vocabulary before they could actually begin to speak? Of course not. We all just grabbed whatever we could and we did our best with what we had. It was much of a trial and error process for every single one of us. No exceptions here, literally zero. And mind you, learning to speak your first language was far more challenging than learning your second language right now. When you were learning your first language, you had to acquire two skills. First one, you needed to learn how to produce a language to begin with. At the same time, you had to learn how to speak your native language, and all of it without any grammar or vocab preparation, explanation, or any practice of that kind. So we have it settled, I think. Extensive vocabulary and complex grammar are not prerequisites for language speaking, full stop. Okay, and then there is this one thing. One thing that most of us don't realize is that knowing words and grammar and speaking a foreign language are, again, two entirely different matters. And those of you who have learned and practiced grammar for years and years know that there is very little connection between doing grammar exercises and learning vocabulary and using it all in conversations. Why is that? It is because grammar exercises and vocabulary practice belong to theoretical knowledge of language. Theoretical. While speaking a foreign language requires a practical use of these elements, which in turn create a skill of communication. Most learners of languages practice the theoretical aspect of the language. So the grammar and the vocab, and then they expect a practical ability in return. And this is simply impossible. Nobody, and you cannot practice one thing and be able to do something different. It is as if you learned to read music notes and expected yourself to be able to play piano as a result of it. It simply cannot happen. These are two very different and separate skills. They need to be learned separately. That's why no matter how much time you spend practicing grammar in books or using apps, you will always end up exactly at the same spot. You know the theory, but you can't use it in practice. You can't because you are practicing the wrong skill. Let me give you an example. Let's just say that you decide that today you will give yourself 6 months to learn all the vocabulary and grammar that one needs for basic, everyday communication in English. And then you will attempt to speak using all that you have learned. Can you imagine what it would take? Can you imagine what it would take for you to be able to implement all that you've learned into an actionable skill? What would you start from? How would you use what you think that you already know? It is simply impossible to imagine, isn't it? It would be the same if you spent 6 months learning by heart all the music notes, all the chords, all the musical ranges, and then you would attempt to play music, play piano. Again, mission impossible. There are no two ways about it. Two different skills. You cannot learn loads theoretically and then expect to be able to practice it all. This theory and practice need to go hand in hand, otherwise you will never learn. There are simply two sides of the same coin. You cannot just ignore one because it's less appealing than the other. It just doesn't work this way. And now, to my final point. I'm sure that you can already see it coming. Just suppose that today you were to take, let's say, just 20 words and only one structure, and you were to practice speaking, creating sentences with this one structure and having these words just in front of you. And then you would add another, let's say, 10 or maybe 20 words and one more structure. And then you would use now 40 words and two structures to create sentences on your own, out loud, coming back to it every single day, just for a few minutes at a time. And then you would move on and you would do the same by adding more and more words and more structures, and working always out loud, remembering to never add more than one. Never add more than one structure at a time to make sure that you can actually use it. How well do you think you would be able to speak English within just a few weeks? You bet! Your ability to speak would be far greater than what so many people end up having after sometimes years and years of practice, theoretical practice. So don't buy into the myth of having to know words and grammar first before you can begin to speak. Knowing something theoretically is not knowing something practically. No theory has ever taught anyone to speak English as much as no theory has ever taught anyone to swim, drive a car, play piano, or to ride a bike. If you want to know more on how to learn to speak and use both grammar and vocab in communication, join me for my webinar and start learning through practice, eliminating theory that wastes your time more than it does you any good. And as always, let me know how you're doing by leaving the comment below, by pressing this like button, and enjoy implementing the ideas that you find in my films. I'm looking forward to seeing you at my webinar. Take care.